The smell of sage and butter filled the kitchen, warm and familiar the way my mother's house used to smell when I was my daughter's age. I was 47, tired from rising at dawn to roast the turkey, my lower back aching but determined to make Thanksgiving perfect. My son had flown in from Chicago, my daughter from grad school, and for a fleeting moment as I set the cornucopia centerpiece and listened to their laughter, I felt the kind of belonging I had spent months yearning for. But in the doorway, my husband's phone buzzed again, seventh time that morning. Taylor's face lit up, not for me, not for our family, but for the woman whose shadow I had been pretending not to see. I swallowed the irritation. Today, I told myself, was about family. He didn't help me lift the turkey. He didn't notice the china I'd polished, the table I'd set with my grandmother's pattern, the battery candles that glowed like real flame. Instead, he sat distracted, his leg bouncing under the table, his eyes darting to his phone. And then, with his throat clearing and shoulders straightening, the signs I had memorized after 23 years of marriage, I knew something was coming. He rose, chair scraping against the hardwood, and made his announcement with the calm authority of a man delivering a business proposal. "I'm selling the house." Selling. The words landed like a physical blow. My daughter's wineglass froze. My son's fork clattered. My own heart seemed to stop. He spoke as though it were nothing, as though he weren't detonating the life we had built. "Holly and her kids need more space. Jack is 8, Joel is 6, little Elise just turned 4. They need a real home." He said her name, Holly, at our dining table in front of our children, like she belonged here, like I didn't. I stayed still, my hands folded in my lap, watching my children's faces crumble. This was how he chose to tell them. Not gently, not privately, not with a shred of respect, but like a quarterly report. When my daughter whispered, "What about Mom?" he finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it, that strange mix of defiance and expectation. He wanted me to break, to cry, scream, beg so he could paint me as hysterical, unfit, unreasonable. But I did none of that. I stood calmly, walked to the counter, and retrieved the cream-colored envelope I had carried for 3 weeks. I had waited for the right moment, or perhaps the worst moment, which apparently was now. I placed it by his plate, right on the gravy stain from his grand announcement. "Since you're making announcements," I said softly. And then I sat back down, picked up my fork, and took a bite of sweet potato casserole that tasted like ash in my mouth. The room shifted. The envelope sat between us like a loaded weapon. My husband's hand hovered over it, the confident man, suddenly uncertain. He turned it over, studied my handwriting, the same careful cursive that had signed his birthday cards, his anniversary notes, our mortgage papers. But this one carried no warmth, only finality. Our son's eyes hardened. "Aren't you going to open it?" His voice cut the silence. Later, Taylor muttered, throat dry, leg bouncing harder. The warmth of the holiday meal disintegrated into silence. My daughter's eyes shimmered with tears as she looked between us. "Mom, are you okay?" I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm fine, sweetheart." And I was. For the first time in months, I was in control. Taylor slipped the envelope into his pocket, but his hand kept drifting back to it. He couldn't leave it alone. And the meal carried on like a ghost of itself, every bite mechanical, every laugh forced, every silence heavier than the last. When his phone buzzed again, her name lit up the screen. Holly. Even in this moment, even with our family in pieces, she could not leave him alone. "Answer it," I said quietly. "Don't let us stop you." His face flushed red as he declined the call, but the damage was done. My son pushed back his chair, appetite gone. 23 years of marriage," he said coldly, "and you announce your affair at Thanksgiving dinner like it's a business deal." He left the table, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, his door slamming shut. My daughter's voice trembled. "Daddy, how could you do this to us?" For a moment I thought I saw regret flicker across his features. But then his phone buzzed again, her voice spilling through the speaker, sharp, demanding. He answered, whispering lies into the receiver, and I saw the look in my daughter's eyes change forever. She would never see her father the same way again. I ate in silence. The turkey was moist, the stuffing perfect, the cranberry sauce balanced. Every hour I had spent in the kitchen had been worth it for this moment, for this memory, for this lesson. because this Thanksgiving would be remembered not for food or laughter, but for truth. Later, as I stacked the plates, Taylor tried to speak. "Jordan, we need to talk." I looked at him, really looked. When had the man I loved become this stranger? "No," I said simply. "We really don't." That night I locked the bedroom door. I heard him pacing downstairs, the envelope still burning in his pocket. Let him sweat, let him wonder. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen as I brewed coffee. Steam rose, carrying with it memories I had pushed aside. March, the first late nights. April, the canceled anniversary dinner. The photographs, the receipts, the children who weren't mine. The puzzle pieces had been there all along, and I had pieced them together in silence. He thought I hadn't noticed. He thought I was still the trusting wife, too naive to suspect. But while he played house with another woman's children, I built my own case. Bank statements, screenshots, receipts for bunk beds and birthday cakes. Every lie, every withdrawal, every hour he spent with her instead of me, I documented it all. I sat in the office of the best divorce attorney in the state and laid down the evidence like a hand of cards. Taylor thought he was orchestrating a clean exit. He thought he would move me out like a piece of furniture, replace me with his mistress and her 3 children, sell the home I built to make space for theirs. But he didn't realize I had already moved the pieces. The deed was in my name. The envelope he carried like a curse would reveal just how wrong he was. The house wasn't his to sell, it never had been. As I sipped my coffee, the door opened and his heavy footsteps filled the kitchen. His hair was rumpled, his face pale, his hand clutched the envelope like it might explode. "What is this?" he asked, voice trembling. I flipped a pancake without turning. "Open it and find out." The sound of tearing paper filled the room. The rustle of official documents, the shifting of air as his world collapsed. Silence followed, stretching long enough for me to taste it. "You transferred the deed," he whispered. His hands shook so violently the papers rattled. "3 months ago," I replied calmly. Amazing how much paperwork goes unread when you're busy playing house with someone else's family. His eyes blazed. "You set me up." "I protected myself," I said, sipping my coffee. "There's a difference." His phone buzzed again. "Holly." I watched the color drain from his face. He answered with forced cheer. "Hey, babe." But her voice, sharp, furious, cut through the room. "You promised me a house. You promised my children a future." Taylor's eyes met mine across the kitchen, desperate pleading, but I only smiled, because I had finally stopped playing the role he wrote for me. And for once, I was the author of my own story. Holly's voice carried through the phone like shards of glass. Even from across the kitchen, I could hear the fury laced into every syllable. She wasn't whispering, she wasn't disguising her rage, she was shouting demands. "You told me this was ours, Taylor. You told me she was out of the picture. Do you know what it's like to tell my kids they're moving into a home that doesn't even belong to us?" Taylor stumbled over his words, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Baby, listen, she blindsided me. I didn't know she—" I cut him off, my voice cool as the coffee in my cup. "Don't blame me for the lies you told her. You made promises you couldn't keep, Taylor. That's on you." He snapped his head toward me, fury flashing in his eyes, but his hand still clutched the phone like it was his lifeline. "I'll fix this," he murmured into the receiver, retreating down the hall like a coward, desperate to escape the weight of truth. I stood alone in the kitchen, the documents spread across the counter like a shield. For months I had carried the ache of betrayal in silence. But now, for the first time, I felt something close to peace. He thought he was orchestrating my downfall, but I had turned the script. That afternoon, I sat with my daughter at the dining table. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled into a messy bun, the weight of disappointment settling on her young shoulders. "Mom," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us sooner?" I reached for her hand, squeezing gently. "Because I needed you to see for yourself. If I told you, you might not have believed me. But last night, now you know who he really is." Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "I can't believe he said her name at Thanksgiving dinner. Like we didn't even matter." My chest tightened. "We matter. We always will. His choices don't define us." She leaned against me, and I stroked her hair the way I used to when she was little. In that moment, I realized something vital. My children weren't just collateral damage in his betrayal. They were witnesses and one day survivors of it too. and I had to show them what survival looked like. Later, my son emerged from his room, anger radiating from every step. He sat across from me, arms crossed, jaw clenched. "Mom, I'll help you fight him. Whatever you need. He doesn't get to do this to you or to us." My eyes welled. My son, my fierce protector, still so young, but already carrying burdens he shouldn't have had to. "Thank you," I said softly. "But I've already started fighting. And I'm not alone. I have you two." The three of us sat there, the silence heavy but strangely comforting. We were a family broken, perhaps, but bound by something stronger than betrayal. By evening, Taylor returned. His shoulders slumped, his tie loose, his face pale. He looked smaller somehow than the man who had stood so proudly at the head of the table 24 hours earlier. He dropped his phone on the counter, ran a hand through his hair, and faced me with something that looked almost like desperation. "Jordan," he said quietly, "we can work this out." I raised an eyebrow. He swallowed hard. "Yes. You don't have to go through with this. The divorce, the house, all of it. We can fix it. For the kids." I studied him, really studied him. This wasn't love talking. This wasn't regret. This was a man scrambling to hold on to the comfort he thought he was entitled to. "You don't want me, Taylor," I said evenly. "You want control. You want to eat Thanksgiving dinner with your mistress on speed dial and still come home to clean sheets. But those days are gone." His face twisted, shame and rage warring within him. "You think you've won because you moved some papers around? Because you caught me off guard, you can't hold this house forever. You'll crumble." I stood meeting his glare head on. I've crumbled before. Quietly in bathrooms where no one could hear me cry. In my car parked outside the grocery store. In bed lying next to a man who was already gone. But this, I gestured to the documents. This isn't crumbling. This is rebuilding. He didn't reply. He stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. For once, it was him who locked me out. That night, I sat on the couch, the quiet of the house pressing down on me. Memories spilled in our first date, the way he once looked at me with genuine tenderness. The nights we stayed up planning futures that would never come true. Grief ached in my chest. Not just for the marriage I was losing, but for the woman I had been. The woman who believed his promises, who never thought she'd need to keep receipts and documents as weapons. I allowed myself to mourn her, and then I let her go. Over the next weeks, the fallout spread. Word traveled fast in our town. Friends whispered, neighbors speculated, coworkers looked at me with pity I neither wanted nor needed. Holly's name surfaced more often, whispered like scandal at the grocery store. And Taylor, he tried to juggle both worlds, appease her, pacify me, salvage his reputation. But each attempt only revealed his desperation. One morning he confronted me at the kitchen table again. His voice was sharp, frantic. "Holly says if I don't get this house, she's leaving me. She says I lied to her. You've ruined everything." I laughed a small, bitter laugh that startled even me. "I ruined everything." "No, Taylor. You did that when you promised my home, our home, to another woman and her children. You did that when you stood at our Thanksgiving table and chose her over us." His fists clenched at his sides, his chest heaving. For a moment I thought he might lash out, but then he deflated, sinking into a chair. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted, voice trembling. I looked at him, my heart heavy but resolute. "Then maybe it's time you find out. Alone." That night, as I tucked myself into bed, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in decades, I wasn't afraid of him leaving. I was afraid of staying, afraid of losing myself in the shadow of his selfishness. And that fear propelled me forward more than anger ever could. My lawyer called the next morning. "Everything is in place," she said firmly. "You're protected. The house is yours. The accounts are frozen. He can't touch you financially." Relief washed over me like sunlight after a storm. The chains I thought were permanent had been undone not by his mercy but by my preparation. And as I sat at the dining table sipping coffee, I realized something important. The envelope had been more than protection. It had been a declaration, a promise to myself, that I would never again allow someone to write my story for me. The courthouse smelled of dust and varnish, a place where lives were dissected under fluorescent lights. I sat at the petitioner's table, hands folded papers neatly stacked, while Taylor shifted uncomfortably beside his attorney. His once confident stride was gone, replaced with nervous glances and clenched fists. Holly wasn't allowed in the chamber, but I could feel her presence lingering just beyond the doors, waiting for the verdict that would determine whether her promised palace was a dream or a delusion. The judge's gavel struck sharp and echoing, "Proceed." My attorney rose calm and deliberate. She laid out the timeline: months of deception, the financial records, the screenshots, the receipts. Each piece of evidence dropped like a stone into water ripples spreading across the room. Taylor squirmed as his double life was laid bare, not just to me, not just to our children, but to the law. When his attorney objected, the judge silenced him with a glance. The facts were too clear, the paper trail too damning. And then came the matter of the house. My lawyer slid the deed forward, crisp and undeniable. "Transferred into my client's sole ownership 3 months before Mr. Parker's declaration to sell," she said firmly. Taylor's face flushed crimson. He reached for the papers as if touching them might undo reality, but the judge only leaned back unimpressed. "The house belongs to Mrs. Parker. That is the law." A murmur swept through the small gallery. I sat still, my heart steady. I had won this battle before it began. Outside the courtroom, I caught a glimpse of Holly. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes burning. When she saw me, she didn't look away. She smirked, as if to say this wasn't over. Her children tugged at her skirt, innocent eyes, unaware of the war their mother was waging. For a moment, I almost pitied her. She was fighting for scraps from a man who couldn't even hold on to his own family. Taylor approached, shoulders slumped, tie askew. "Jordan, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "We can settle this quietly. Don't drag me through more hearings. Think of the kids." I looked him dead in the eye. "You thought of the kids when you stood at Thanksgiving and announced you were replacing them? You thought of them when you put another woman's children ahead of your own." His lips parted, but no words came. He turned away, defeated. The weeks stretched into a blur of depositions and negotiations. Holly grew more desperate. She called me once, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you've won? He's still mine. He still loves me." I laughed softly into the receiver. "If he loved you, you wouldn't need to call me to prove it." Then I hung up, leaving her to drown in her own insecurity. But the truth was, their relationship was crumbling. My children heard whispers when visiting their father, arguments behind closed doors, Holly demanding a future he couldn't deliver, Taylor scrambling to appease her with promises that dissolved as quickly as he spoke them. It was almost poetic, the woman who once thought she was my replacement, now discovering that betrayal does not discriminate. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. Slowly, deliberately. I repainted the living room walls, a soft ivory covered the cracks of years spent in silence. I planted lavender in the garden, the scent of calm washing through the windows each morning. My daughter helped me string lights across the porch, her laughter filling the evening air. My son fixed the squeaky gate, his determination as strong as his quiet fury. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like ours again. But Taylor wasn't done. He arrived one evening uninvited, his car headlights sweeping across the driveway. I opened the door before he knocked. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady. He looked at me, eyes hollow. "I don't know who I am without this house. Without you. Without—" His voice trailed off, heavy with something between regret and desperation. I studied him carefully. This was not love. This was loss, the loss of control, of power, of comfort. "You'll figure it out," I said simply, and closed the door in his face. He stood there for a long moment, and then I heard the sound of his footsteps retreating, his car engine fading into the night. The final hearing came in December. The judge ruled in my favor on every count: sole ownership of the house, primary custody of our children, protection of my assets. Taylor left the courtroom with nothing but a fraction of visitation rights and a reputation scarred beyond repair. Holly didn't show her face that day. Perhaps even she knew the battle was lost. That night, I sat by the fire, the warmth flickering against my skin, and allowed myself to feel it all. The grief, the rage, the relief. 23 years had ended, not with a quiet goodbye, but with a storm that stripped us bare. And yet in the ashes I found myself. My daughter curled beside me on the couch, Mom, she whispered, you were so strong. I smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I wasn't always strong. I just refused to stay broken. My son joined us, his hand resting on mine. Dad will regret this forever. I looked at them both, my heart swelling with love. Let him. His regret is his own. Ours is the future, and it belongs to us. The winter wind howled against the windows as though the world itself was echoing the chaos in our lives. December had always been my favorite month, lights, twinkling in the streets, the smell of pine and cinnamon filling every corner. But this year it felt different. The holidays no longer belonged to us. They belonged to me and the children, and I was determined to claim them. One night, as I hung stockings by the fireplace, my phone buzzed. It was my son upstairs sending me a link. Mom, you need to see this. The article headline froze me in place. Harrington executive Taylor Parker, accused of misconduct affair with colleague, goes public. My hands trembled not with shock, but with a strange, hollow recognition. His double life wasn't confined to our home, it was spilling into his career. The article laid it bare: inappropriate expenses, charged to company accounts, unexplained withdrawals, and whispers that Holly had leveraged her relationship to gain favors at his firm. Within days, he was placed on leave. His empire, his career, his reputation, his carefully crafted image collapsed like a house of cards. He came to the house again, desperate, pounding on the door, until my son finally opened it. Taylor's eyes were wild, his clothes disheveled, his voice breaking. Jordan, please, let me in. I need to explain. I met him in the foyer, arms folded, my children standing behind me like sentinels. You've explained enough, I said coldly. Please, he begged. Holly's gone. She left me. She said I was useless without the job, without the house. She took her kids and disappeared. She won't answer my calls. His chest heaved as tears streamed down his face. I have nothing left. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had gambled everything: our marriage, our children, our home, on a woman who vanished at the first sign of struggle. He had chosen her family over his own, and in the end, she chose herself. Now you know, I said softly, what it feels like to be discarded. He crumpled to the floor, sobbing, the image of a man undone by his own arrogance. My daughter whispered, Mom, please don't let him stay. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, sweetheart, he won't. Taylor looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. Can't we start over? Please, Jordan, I'll change. I'll be better. Just give me one more chance. I crouched down close enough to see the cracks in his facade, close enough to remember the man I once loved. And then I said the words I had carried in my heart for months. No, Taylor, I gave you every chance. I gave you my trust, my loyalty, my youth. You chose to throw it away. Now I'm choosing me. He stared at me, broken, as I rose and opened the door. The cold wind rushed in, carrying his sobs into the night. He stumbled out, and for the first time I felt no ache, no longing, no regret, only release. After he left, silence filled the house like a balm. My children exhaled, their bodies relaxing, as though a shadow had finally lifted. We sat by the fire, cocoa in hand, and for the first time in years, the laughter that bubbled between us was pure, untainted by fear. But Taylor's downfall wasn't finished. Weeks later, whispers of embezzlement turned into charges. Holly testified against him, her words sharp as knives. She painted him as manipulative, deceitful, reckless, a portrait not far from the truth. Watching the news, I couldn't help but marvel at the symmetry. The mistress he had chosen over me became the hammer that drove the final nail into his coffin. The trial dragged on, his name plastered across headlines. My children avoided the stares at school, their classmates whispering about the scandal. But they held their heads high because they knew the truth: we had survived. One night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. Mom, do you think Dad ever loved us? The question pierced me. I sat beside her, brushing her hair back. Yes, I said honestly. I think he did. But love isn't enough when you don't protect it. He loved us in his way, but he loved himself more. And that's why we're here now. She nodded slowly, her young face marked by wisdom far beyond her years. I'm glad you didn't let him take the house. This feels like home again. Tears burned my eyes as I kissed her forehead. It is sweetheart, it always will be. As the trial neared its end, I was called to testify not about the finances, but about the man behind the numbers. I sat on the stand, my voice calm, steady. Taylor Parker is a man who thought he could replace his family like furniture, who promised stability to one woman while betraying another, who risked everything for greed and lost everything because of it. Taylor sat across from me, hollow-eyed, defeated. He didn't meet my gaze. When I stepped down, I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into life again. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, painting, gardening, reading, late into the night. I hosted dinners with friends who had stood by me, laughter spilling into the home that was mine alone. My children thrived, their confidence growing as they realized betrayal didn't define them. One evening, as I painted in the living room, my son came in quietly. "Mom," he said, "I'm proud of you." The words caught me off guard, my brush pausing mid-stroke. "Why?" I asked softly. "Because you didn't let him break you. You showed us how to fight without losing yourself." I set the brush down, tears blurring my vision. "I fought because of you two. You gave me a reason to stand tall." And in that moment, I knew the truth. Revenge hadn't been the house, the documents, the courtroom victories. The real revenge was freedom, the life we built after betrayal, the strength to laugh again, the courage to love ourselves enough to walk away. The trial ended on a gray morning in March. Rain streaked the courthouse windows, the sky heavy with the weight of endings. Taylor stood before the judge, his once polished suit wrinkled, his once commanding voice reduced to a whisper. The verdict was clear: guilty on multiple counts of financial misconduct. Sentencing would follow, but the damage was already done. I sat in the gallery, my hands clasped in my lap, watching the man I once built a life with reduced to rubble. 23 years of memories flickered in my mind: the first kiss, the wedding vows, the laughter of newborn nights, the arguments, the silences, the betrayals. And now this. A man undone by his own choices. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned once, his eyes searching for me. For what? Forgiveness. Pity. I gave him nothing. I lowered my gaze and let him walk out of my life for the last time. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. My children stood beside me, their faces calm, their shoulders squared. They weren't broken. They weren't lost. They were stronger now, forged in the fire of his betrayal and my defiance. We walked together through the courthouse doors into a future that belonged only to us. In the weeks that followed, I allowed myself to feel everything I had buried: grief for the marriage that died long before the divorce, sorrow for the woman who once believed love was enough, anger for the years stolen. But I also felt something else: gratitude. Gratitude that I had survived, that I had found my voice, that I had shown my children that dignity is worth fighting for. Spring arrived slowly. I planted tulips in the garden, their colors bursting like defiance against the memory of winter. The house was quiet, peaceful hours. Laughter filled the halls again, not strained or forced, but real. Friends visited, bringing bottles of wine and stories that carried into the night. My daughter painted her room a bright yellow, declaring it a new beginning. My son mowed the lawn with pride, claiming the yard as his own. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, the air cool and sweet. For the first time in years, I felt at home in my own skin. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's replacement, just as me, Jordan. A woman who had been betrayed, who had been broken, and who had risen stronger than before. Sometimes I wondered about Holly. Did she regret leaving when Taylor's downfall began? Did she feel guilt for the role she played, or was she already chasing another promise from another man? Perhaps it didn't matter. Her chapter in my story was closed just like his. What mattered was the lesson etched into every scar, every sleepless night, every courtroom battle. Betrayal can shatter you, but it can also set you free. Revenge isn't always about destruction, it's about reclamation. Taking back your life, your dignity, your power. One night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked up at me and whispered, "Mom, do you think we'll ever be the same again?" I kissed her forehead gently. "No," I said, "we'll be better." And I meant it. because I had learned that healing isn't about going back to who you were before the pain. It's about becoming someone new, someone wiser, stronger, unafraid of the storms, because you've already walked through the worst of them. So this is my story. A story of betrayal, of deceit, of a man who tried to sell the life I built for another woman, and of the moment I handed him an envelope that changed everything. A story of loss, yes, but also of survival, of laughter returning to broken halls, of dignity reclaimed one quiet choice at a time. And if you're listening now, if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever felt discarded, let me tell you this. You are not the sum of someone else's choices. You are not defined by the promises they broke. You are defined by the way you rise, by the way you take back your story, by the way you decide that your worth is not negotiable. If my journey has touched you, if my scars have reminded you of your own strength, then I ask you to share this story. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me your story. Because when we speak our truths, we break the silence that keeps us trapped. And together we learn that betrayal does not end us, it begins us. Thank you for listening.